Blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. By the way, Happy New Year. As 2024 is rolling out, we are coming up fast on the beginning of the next Idaho legislative session, and this is where we're going to have a lot of work to do over the days and weeks ahead as the legislature meets, and certain legislators and their pals in the corporate press obfuscate and otherwise try to shade things in a way that's favorable to their agenda. The truth, it should be something that's easy enough for us to figure out. In other words, give us enough facts, we'll make up our minds what it is and what isn't. But for some reason, somebody doesn't trust us. I wonder why that is. Anyway, it's going to be an exciting time, and today we're going to be talking about word games. In fact, I want to start out with a good example of word games, and this is, I'm sure, a very well-intentioned tweet from Lauren Nicochia, who says, as I reflect on the future Idaho Dems want for Idahoans, thriving main streets with economic opportunity, quality education, personal freedoms, and an affordable path to raising our kids, it's clear that supermajority rule is holding us back. Now, what is she talking about? She's talking about a supermajority rule that you need a supermajority if you want to raise taxes. In other words, it's this unfettered access because of that supermajority that is somehow holding us back. And look, she hit all the right points. I mean, who could possibly in their right mind be against economic opportunity? But if that's happening with government choosing winners and losers, guess what? That's not economic opportunity. That's cronyism. That's picking favorites. That's, crony capitalism, rather. And it's not anything like the free market that we're supposed to have economic opportunity in. Quality education, she says? Why, yes, as long as you choose government-run education institutions. Personal freedoms, to cut off your child's genitalia, to murder that child in the womb. Yeah, that's what we mean by personal freedoms. Freedom to think, freedom to keep and bear arms. Well, now that's another matter. Yeah, it's a pretty duplicitous way of saying some personal freedoms without actually specifying what she means there. And the affordable path to raising our kids. Hold the phone there, sister. My kids are my kids. They're not our kids. And I don't care if you have a mouse in your pocket. They remain my kids, and my accountability is to our creator, not to you and not to the rest of the village. So if you would kindly step off. Thank you. I wish you the very best, but I also hope that you are very frustrated in the upcoming legislative session, because I don't want to see your version of whatever you think those things mean enacted. What I want to see is limited government. I want to see respect for our natural rights, but that's only going to happen on the part of people who are actively standing for proper government and the principles and practices of freedom, which, by the way, is where some of our greatest word games take place. Not because they're the ones playing them, but because the people who are against them are calling them names and insisting that they're all about the dark money and this horrible agenda, when, they're the ones fitting us for a straitjacket. So let's dive in with an example of what some of these word games look like. And it starts with a case that popped up here, I think it was within the last year and a half, where the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare was questioned about what it was doing with federal grant money. And the prosecutor in the child care grants case says there is probable cause. An Idaho official in the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare committed crime. The allegation, revealed in court filings by AG Labrador's special prosecutor appointed in an investigation over federal grants distributed by Department of Health and Welfare, came with few other details. And here's our first beginning of the word games, thanks to Idaho Capital Sun's Kyle, I don't know how you say your name, Kyle Fannenstiel. Anyway, Kyle is going to show us how really there was no reason for this, but I'll give you an even more glaring example once we're done with this one. So let's dive a little bit into the story. A prosecutor appointed by Idaho Attorney General Raul Labrador said there is probable cause that a former Idaho Department of Health and Welfare employee who led a scrutinized child care program committed a crime. Court filings show. What was the crime? The crime was using that money for purposes it was absolutely, by law, directed not to be used for. But those purposes included woke programs for underage kids, and I'm sure you can understand that laws really are of no consequence when we have little minds to warp. Or at least that seems to be the thinking of some. Now, the article goes on to tell us the allegation came with little other information, leaving us to suppose, well, they must have just made it up, such as what crime could ex-state official Erica Rupp be accused of, the official charges she could face, or what specific evidence backs up the claim. Well, it is an investigation still underway, so maybe that's not something they're ready to spill just yet, but let's continue here. The assertion was detailed in new court documents to settle who pays roughly $187,000 in attorney fees from current and former Idaho Health Department officials who sought to block Labrador's civil subpoenas relating to an investigation into the grant program. The new filing also underscores that an investigation is still probing how $72 million of federal child care grants were spent in Idaho. Now, I'm sure that Mr. Jepson stepping down as the head of health and welfare has nothing to do with this, and more with his desire to go pursue a life of fulfillment and whatever it is that retirement could bring. But it does look a little bit, the departure looks a little bit suspicious nonetheless. Big questions remain. Now, the article tells us what began as an investigation based on the equivalent of reasonable suspicion of wrongdoing has now become a much more serious matter. And there is now probable cause to believe a crime has been committed and that petitioner, Erica Rupp, committed said crime. That's according to Special Deputy Attorney General Christopher Boyd, written December 18th in response to Rupp's request for Labrador to pay attorney's fees. So the investigation's not even over, but you need to pay my attorney's fees. And I know that there are those who've been criticizing, well, why would the Attorney General, who's supposed to represent the state, why would he, come down on the side of the people of the state of Idaho or the taxpayers of the state of Idaho rather than the agency which is under fire? In other words, why won't he cover for those who may be engaged in wrongdoing under, the color of authority? That's a good question. Was it just the state that appointed him, or was it the people that elected him, would be my response. I think the answer to that question should be pretty obvious. Rupp's attorney, in a statement to the Idaho Capital Sun before his response in court filings, cast the accusation as furthering a politically motivated attack on the grants program. Of course it is. Of course, no one who is standing up for upholding the law, or for that matter, protecting kids from mind-bending, kind of curricula, would ever do it for anything other than a politically motivated attack reason. Or at least that's what we're supposed to believe. Attorney Scott McKay said in his statement, Ms. Rupp is a dedicated professional who's devoted her life to public service in Idaho and giving back to our state. Oh, she probably teaches, small children to walk in her spare time. For the Attorney General to suggest otherwise and continue a politically motivated attack on a federally funded program that benefited Idaho children is wrong. But that's not the gist of what's being questioned here. Was inappropriate, meaning sexually explicit and other woke programs being funded and directed to children for whom by law it could not be directed to, in part because they're underage and partly just because they fell outside of the parameters of those programs. That's what we're supposed to not notice. Idaho Department of Health and Welfare spokesman Greg Stahl praised Rupp's performance and denied wrongdoing. Keep that in mind. You're going to see this again here very soon. Boyd was appointed as special prosecutor in the case in August after a judge barred Labrador from pursuing the civil investigative demands. Now, I think he actually only barred him from pursuing 20 out of the 32 agencies from which he had asked for these subpoenas, or which he had given these subpoenas and asked for information. The judge's order said Labrador had a conflict of interest on the case, citing previous legal guidance from the Attorney General's office to the Department of Health and Welfare in late 2022 and early 2023 that said the agency's distribution of grant funds was legally sound. But the Attorney General's office withdrew those opinions in March, saying they were legally inaccurate. Now, let's remember that Attorney General Raul Labrador was elected to replace Lawrence Wasden. And there were questions that hang over what kind of games Wasden may have been playing or allowed to have been played under his leadership. So it's possible that a conflicting opinion was released, but I want you to see, again, there's some great stirring of the waters to try and confuse things and muddy things up just a bit more. It would be impossible for an agency or agency employee to rely on legal memorandum to justify actions that were taken prior to the legal memorandum having been issued. Importantly, these memos, even if accepted at face value, were both issued after $36 million in funds had already been distributed and after concerns by the legislature and others had already been raised about the legality of how those funds were being dispersed, Boyd wrote. So again, the taxpayers, I'm sure, would love to see their money used wisely. But this sounds more like the earlier memorandum. Oh yeah, this is good. Was more of a cover your rear end. I think that's how Attorney General Labrador portrayed it. He said those were CYA memorandum, but they did not necessarily follow the law, and that's what's in question. Were there attempts to skirt the law? Well, the Attorney General's office says it appears yes. If a legal review found an issue, State Health Department spokesperson Stahl said the department could have intervened to correct an issue. Now, here's an interesting little twist. Had that legal opinion revealed we made a mistake, we could have adjusted our implementation of the program from that point forward. They had the law to guide them, but they were looking for, opinions to help them understand. And complying with legislative intent is our goal, important to Department of Health and Welfare, and essential to building trust and confidence in the department and personnel. Well, if you're going to play fast and loose with the rules, maybe that trust is being degraded a little bit. Okay, so let's give you a little closer to home example of what it looks like when another person in a position of authority screws up and is held to account. Politico is offering nightly reports on the right's coordinated campaign that helped engineer the departure of the head of the most influential university in the world. Of course, they're talking about former Harvard president Claudine Gay, who it turns out apparently has engaged in plagiarism multiple times and has been called on it. But you got to see the reactions. And again, I want you to kind of look at the parallels here between why the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare really did nothing wrong. And really, if only we had known that something was... The law was pretty clear, or there wouldn't be a question right now. But notwithstanding an Attorney General's Department memorandum, they're looking for cover where there is none. They're trying to excuse things, like namely exposing young children to more of that woke agenda in various forms. And that's where they went awry. So let's talk about, Claudine Gay stepping down as the president of Harvard. The complaint here is, as Heather Lauer points out, the more rigorous reporting, actual reporting that more closely adhered to mainstream media standards, made the allegations harder to overlook. In other words, when people put the truth out there, eventually it became too difficult to ignore it or explain it away. She says, you mean the mainstream media standards that intentionally chose to disregard this story in the first place? Let's dig a little bit deeper here. Ibram X. Kendi. Wasn't he a speaker at Boise State University last year? Racist mobs won't stop until they topple all black people from positions of power and influence who are not reinforcing the structure of racism. I think we're pretty clear on what his grift is at this point. It's to cry racism. What these racist mobs are doing should be obvious to any reporter who cares about truth or justice as opposed to conflicts and cliques. What was it Saul Alinsky said? Accuse them of what you're guilty of. So this is in response to Harvard President Claudine Gay resigning, shortest tenure in university history. I do like Christopher Rufo's answer, though, to him. Sorry, Henry. The racist mob didn't minimize anti-Semitism. They didn't plagiarize papers. They didn't threaten the free press and attempt to cover it up. Claudine Gay did that. He says it's not 2020 anymore. Calling everything racist doesn't work. You'll need to find a new grift. Some reason I really like to see that word, that shoe, if you will, on the other foot. Here's Cornel West weighing in. How sad but predictable that the same figures and forces enabling the ethnic cleansing and genocidal attacks on Palestinians in Gaza, Ackman, Bloom, Summers, and others, push out the first black woman president of Harvard. And he rails against this racism against both Palestinians and black people. Now, the question is, fighting for truth when Gay lied her way through her academic career, used diversity, equity, and inclusivity to remove anyone that questioned her, that kind of truth and justice? Seems like some on the left are finding out that some of their favorite weapons have a double edge. And they can, in fact, swing both ways. I like how Thomas Woods summed up, how they handled this. Thomas Woods talked about an email to alumni from the Harvard Corporation about the situation, included this passage. While President Gay has acknowledged missteps and has taken responsibility for them, there's the minimization. Well, there may have been missteps and taken responsibility. Okay, by stepping down. Good. It is also true that she has shown remarkable resilience in the face of deeply personal and sustained attacks. By what? The truth? Because that's really what the attack was. People were pointing out the truth, and it was not something she wished to acknowledge. But they continue. While some of this is played out in the public domain, much of it has taken place in the form of repugnant and in some case racist vitriol directed at her through disgraceful emails and phone calls. We condemn such attacks in the strongest possible terms. They are so brave to stand up against racism, as if that was the crux of what was happening here. But it's not. And again, going back to Tom Woods, he says, not many people seem to care all that much about her lackluster scholarly record, 11 papers total, all about race and gender, more than half of which involved flagrant acts of plagiarism, and her DEI reign of terror until her ill-starred congressional testimony back in December of last year, even though it was just as important before that testimony as it was afterwards. He says, all the same, it's good that she was driven out. The DEI establishment needs a good stake through the heart like that. The usual sources are crying racism, but since they have a 10-word vocabulary, but he says, if Gay were white, you got to remember, she never would have come near the presidency of Harvard in the first place. And every last person on the planet knows it. Isn't that something? So the important thing here, according to the Harvard Corporation, is to condemn unspecified attacks, right? Which, if real, nobody in the world actually defends, and then downplay Gay's wrongdoing. Mere missteps. Those, my friend, are what word games look like. And Tom says they've learned nothing, they will change nothing, in case that wasn't obvious already. There's no serious acknowledgement at all. No acknowledgement of fault. In a 672-word letter, the words "has acknowledged missteps and has taken responsibility for them" are the only ones that even slightly acknowledge what's been going on. Instead, the letter is a celebration of Gay, her brilliance, her leadership skills. And she will now return to the faculty and, according to the Daily Mail, retain a salary of around $900,000 a year from the university, despite being forced to resign amidst a plagiarism scandal. See how word games can make you almost untouchable? It's almost enough to make me believe in word magic. Almost. But not quite. All right. Here's another example of word magic and word games at play. This was a headline from KTVB. Multiple families leave Idaho in response to Vulnerable Child Protection Act. Wow. That's supposed to convince us that it was wrong to insist that parents and doctors do not take permanent steps, but let that child reach the age of 18 where he or she or they or they or them or them or whatever can make that choice. There are too many parents out there that seem to follow the line of thinking of, my cat is vegan. My cat won't eat meat at all. Okay, well, I met one or two people that had a vegan cat, but it was pretty clear, just between you, me, and the cat, who was really making the decisions as to, what those dietary choices were. And in many cases, you will find that the parents, have 2 or 3 trans children. Statistically, the odds are beyond astronomical. We're talking in the trillions to have, that many children just happen to be trans. Why we don't call it what it is, it sounds like a very, difficult case of Munchausen by proxy, abuse of the child. But boy, multiple families say they're leaving Idaho in response to that act. I don't know if I take quite the joyous attitude some do, saying, well, good. Don't let the door hit you or the good Lord split you, on your way out. But if they would be happier elsewhere, then I think maybe that's probably the better choice for them. I feel for those kids, though. What kind of explanation are these parents going to have if those young people are still alive years from now to regret this decision, which statistically most of them do? All right. One final thought here. When we play word games, 51 former U.S. Intel experts signed a letter saying the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. You do remember that, right? 700 plus Harvard scholars signed a letter saying they supported Claudine Gay as president before she resigned for serial plagiarism. Nearly every major medical organization said the COVID vaccine was safe and effective. And now they wonder why we do the opposite whenever they tell us to trust the experts. These radical elitists have destroyed their own credibility. Now, I'm not telling you that that's the reason for us to, throw garbage at them as they walk down the street or otherwise, make their lives miserable. I'm just saying that if you were thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't give my consent, or maybe I shouldn't go along and pretend with them that this is the way things ought to be, you're not wrong for thinking so. And especially when it comes to the news that you consume, just understand that word games are kind of what they do. They're very good at it, by the way. But in the end, this is what they come off as. I'm a journalism. That's about the credibility I would give them, too. Good job, Ralph. Well done, boy. That's some good fluting there. Think for yourself, question it all, pay close attention during this legislative session. Tonight, by the way, we will be seeing the first of Legislature 101 from the Idaho Freedom Foundation. There may still be time if you're quick. You know, you can get signed up. If not, if you have taken the first class and you want to take the second one, these are online. It's a Zoom call that you can sit in on to learn how the legislature works, how the assignments go, how a bill travels through the process. Very informative stuff. And if you want to be an informed citizen, if you want to use your influence wisely, this would be a very good thing for you to consider doing. Go to idahofreedom.org. You can find the details there. And we'll be back to talk more about some word games, among other fun things, on Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see.
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.